So, not long ago, I decided to go fishing down by my house at a river I hadn't fished in before. It's in a patch of woods right next to a park that's known for having a lot of homeless people camping out there. I'd been meaning to check it out for a while, so I figured now was as good of a time as any. I walked along the riverbank looking for a good spot. After a few minutes of searching, I came across this huge camp tucked away in the trees. It was some kind of big hut made from sticks, and it was packed with empty liquor bottles. I didn't want to get too close, but as I walked by, I noticed a little Spider-Man fishing pole lying in the dirt and a hatchet leaning against one of the logs. When I walked by, I didn't see any homeless people around, and I kept going to find a better spot further down the river. Eventually, I found a good place to fish. The river's pretty quiet there, and I thought I could sit for a while. The fishing was slow, so I ended up just propping my pole up against a tree and started looking around. After a few minutes, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. When I turned my head, I saw a guy walking slowly towards me. At first, I thought he might be another fisherman or someone out for a walk, but then I saw what he was holding. It was the hatchet I had seen earlier from the homeless camp. The guy was wearing a long black coat, even though it wasn't that cold out, and he had a scraggly gray beard. I thought about what I should do, but all I had on me was a little 3-inch gutting and cleaning knife. I wasn't going to stand a chance if it came down to a fight with that tiny knife against a hatchet. The guy kept coming towards me, moving slow and steady, and he didn't seem friendly at all. I felt like my legs were made of lead, but I managed to stumble over to my tackle box and start shoving my gear inside as fast as I could. I grabbed everything, shoved it into the box, and started backing away, trying to keep the guy in my sight. I could hear him yelling something, but it was all garbled. It sounded like he was shouting at me, but I wasn't about to stop and listen. As I turned and started running, I heard him scream something again, but I didn't wait around. I wasn't about to give him a reason to come after me. I ran all the way back to the main road, and by the time I hit the pavement, I didn't stop until I got to my car. I've never gone back to fish there since. I think most likely the man was just trying to scare me off, since he probably fished there and viewed it as his personal fishing area. I don't blame the guy, since he might be sustaining himself from the fish he catches if he's desperate. However, desperate people do desperate things, and I wasn't going to stick around as a homeless guy approached me screaming with a hatchet. I am an avid fisherman, and I love going for catfish. I also love to fish at night when it's peaceful and quiet. I tend to stay out extremely late on non-work nights, so that leads me to why I was at a lake at night, experiencing what I did. I forget what day of the week it was, but I was alone. My girlfriend at the time didn't want to come with, and I couldn't convince anyone else to come with me either. So I grabbed my gear and my gun and went to fish for a few hours on my own. It was going well, and I got a few catfish, but while I was fishing, I kept hearing talking, yet I couldn't see anyone. I figured maybe they were just walking down the road, and I paid it no mind. Fast forward a few hours, and I heard a whistle. The lake I was at is a city lake, and it has walking paths that are well lit. I looked around, but I didn't see or hear anything further. I resumed fishing, and then I heard another whistle, this time to my right. I was thinking to myself that it was probably some kids, but this was an attention-seeking whistle, like one that someone would do if they wanted your attention. Again, I didn't see or hear anything, so I went back to fishing. I heard a third whistle, this time from behind me, and I'd had enough now, so I decided to go investigate this time. I put my hand on my gun, and I quietly walked around the building nearby. Nothing was there, and I didn't hear anyone else as well. This seems impossible that I wouldn't hear someone walking around, since there's gravel everywhere, but as I turned around to walk back, directly behind me I heard a very loud and shrill whistle. It sounded close enough and loud enough to make me flip around and draw my gun, but still nothing was there. My heart was pounding at this point, so I grabbed my stuff and booked it to my car. Fast forward a week later, when I was with a friend and I went to the same lake. I had already put the whistling from the previous solo trip out of my mind. We started fishing and we were having a decent time. As I looked around throughout the night, I kept noticing shadows in the trees across the lake. It almost looked like something was running near the lights and jumping around. I didn't think much of it and figured that the night was playing tricks on me. My friend, who didn't tell me until later that night, also observed the exact same thing. It was getting close to 3 a.m. now, and we heard some people chatting. We couldn't see anyone, which was odd, because the lake is kind of like a pit with roads all around, and it's impossible not to see someone walking by. We were kind of sketched out, but we kept fishing because it was going well. Around 3:15 a.m., I began to hear birds tweeting. I turned to my friend and said, "You hear birds chirping? Kind of odd for 3 a.m." He looked around, kind of looking paranoid, and then 5 to 10 minutes later he said, "Those aren't birds chirping, someone's mimicking them." I looked at my friend, kind of strange, and then he went on to tell me a story his coworker had told him. It was about incidents of people dying here, and why the city doesn't let anyone swim in the lake now. As soon as he finished his story saying that people have died at the lake, the crickets stopped, and the wind died down immediately, and the fish stopped biting completely. We looked at each other and asked if we felt strange, and we both agreed that we should pack it up and head out. As we were leaving, the tweeting started back up again, and we quickly went back to the car. My friend suddenly flipped around with his knife drawn, and I instinctively pulled my gun. He yelled that we needed to leave now, and we scrambled to the car and drove off. Once we were on the road, I asked my friend why he pulled his knife like that, and he stated that something was running behind him like it was charging at the both of us. I have no idea what's up with that lake, and what happened those 2 nights that I was there, but even thinking about it gives me the chills. That night really scared me badly. Something wasn't right, and we both knew it. I was fishing at this quiet lake up north one morning. It was about 5 a.m., still dark out, and I was getting in an early session before work that day. I liked fishing at this spot because it was always so calm. Nobody was around, just the sound of water and birds waking up. There was a shower facility by the lake, mostly for people camping or staying nearby, and I usually used it to take a shower after fishing before heading out for work. As I walked over to the building, I noticed someone was already inside one of the individual stalls. The door was cracked and I could hear the water running. I didn't think much of it, and I figured maybe someone was just getting an early start too. But when I got closer, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. There was a man, and he was standing just outside the shower area. He was sort of leaning against the wall, wiping his hands off on his clothes. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I saw the blood. There was blood on his shirt and his hands. It was like he had been in some kind of a mess. And it wasn't just a little, it was a lot of it soaked through his clothes. He didn't seem to notice me at first, and I wasn't sure what to do. Should I ask if he needed help? Maybe he was hurt, or also a fisherman and had been gutting fish and it got messy. He didn't act strange though. He just walked over to the shower area like it was completely normal. The only thing strange he did was stare me down as he walked in and shut the door behind him to his stall. I had wanted to ask him if he was alright, but that stare down had stopped me from saying anything. It was like a death stare. I figured, okay, maybe I'm overthinking it. People get weird sometimes, maybe it's just a weird coincidence. I went into a stall to take a quick shower and tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about that guy and how he had gotten so bloody. When I finished my shower, the man was already gone. About 20 minutes later, when I was packing up my gear to leave, I noticed a couple of cars pulling in. 2 guys got out, both wearing FBI jackets. They didn't look like the usual cops you see around. These guys looked serious, like they were there for something big. One of the agents came over to me and asked if I had seen anyone around the shower facility that morning or lake that morning. I told him about the man I had seen, described what he looked like, and mentioned the blood. He didn't seem too surprised, but he asked a lot of questions. Before the cops, investigators, or whoever they were left, I asked really quick what was going on. They told me that the guy they were looking for who I saw had killed his wife, daughter, and his daughter's friend who had been staying over. They had found the bodies in their house earlier that morning after a disturbance phone call from a neighbor, and had been looking for that guy for a few hours now. It still blows my mind. It was so normal the way he acted, like nothing was wrong. I would have never guessed that I'd end up in the middle of something like that. I just can't shake the image of him standing there covered in his family's blood like it was no big deal. This happened 3 years ago when I was 17 years old. It was the summer and my friends and I only had part-time jobs, so we used to go fishing whenever we could. Throughout the summer break, we explored many different rivers and lakes looking for the best spots to fish. Usually we would encounter animals or people, but nothing special. None of us had our own cars at that point in our lives, so we would usually take a bus to a location or just walk to it. One day, my friends and I were on a bus and went to a city not too far away. We arrived to the city, and before we left the bus, an old creepy drunk guy said something along the lines of good luck on fishing. He asked us which spot we were headed to, and we didn't think anything about it at the time, so we told him the name of the lake we were going to fish. The only thing the man said was, "Well, good luck, I hope you catch some fish." Anyways, we arrived at the lake, which was very beautiful, and started fishing. At around 1:30 p.m., after we had some beers, we could hear some arguing in the distance. Since we had a large group of people, we weren't really scared. A friend and I went to investigate the arguing while the others stayed near the fishing spot. Upon arriving towards where the noise had come from, we spotted the same old drunk guy from the bus earlier. He was crawling in the grass and kind of trying to hide in a bush. We asked him what he was doing, to which he replied he was hunting. We did not see any weapon on him whatsoever, so I proceeded to ask him what he was hunting without a weapon. He got up and said to us in his exact words, "Look, this is a coincidence, and I'm going to get going." Then he started stumbling away. We returned to our group and continued enjoying our fishing. A few hours later now, at around 4 p.m., we heard somebody angrily shouting in the distance again. We turned and looked towards the voices and spotted this buff guy in a black shirt covered in tattoos. Behind him was the same old guy from earlier. The buff guy yelled out, "What do you think you're doing on my property?" We, of course, didn't know that this was someone's property since we were not from this city and it looked like a public lake. We apologized to the man and said we would leave immediately. Some of our friends had already even packed up and were walking away towards the bus stop. It was my friend and I still left, trying to wrap up the conversation with this buff guy so we could leave. However, this guy was not content with our apology and seemed to want something more, I guess. He told us that we had to call our friends and tell them to come back, or else the two of us weren't leaving. I, of course, did not want to call our friends or stick around these two strange guys any longer, especially since he was threatening us now. We had been quietly fishing, doing nothing to disturb anyone, and the lake was a long ways from any houses regardless. The buff man seemed to be going way over the top with how he was acting, especially since we were actively trying to leave and get off the property. My friend eventually stopped the pointless back and forth talking with the buff guy. He told him that we were leaving now and he started to walk away. Now this is where it gets scary. The buff dude grabbed my friend around his neck and he started arguing with him, saying he was not going anywhere. I wasn't just going to watch this guy chokehold my friend, so I jumped in and hit the guy in the face. He let go of my friend and chased after me. After I ran for about a minute, the dude got tired and gave up. So I ended up leaving the woods and went onto the street. I waited on a bench for some time and then saw my other friend coming out of the woods as well. He sat next to me and told me that when the dude started chasing me, the old guy who had still been there quiet the whole time had tried to jump on him with a hunting knife. He thankfully missed my friend, who was able to push the old man away from him and run away as well. We called the cops after that and had met up with our other friends who had started to come back for us because we were taking so long. A patrol came and we gave our statement. The cops explained to us that the part where we had been was close to private property, but where we were was actually public land and we were allowed to be there. So that piece of information, again with the fact that the guy grabbed my friend around the neck and the older man had a knife, was definitely not how they should have handled the situation. I don't even know if those guys were the owners of the private property or if they were just some thugs trying to rob us or something. I'm not sure. We ended up getting home safely, and nowadays we laugh at the story whenever it gets brought up. This happened a few years ago when I was in high school. My grandparents on my mom's side rented out a large cabin in a campground near the Canadian border for a bunch of my family to go on a weekend fishing trip. It was an actual campground, but it had a large restaurant and gift shop area. There were 5 cabins, each about 150 to 200 feet apart, and each of them were about 500 feet from the lake we were on. In between the lake and cabins were fire pits. The fire pits and seats were dug into the ground, so you had to use stairs to get in and out of them easily. They were also facing the lake, away from the cabins, which means if you were sitting by the fire pit, it was impossible to see the cabin, and vice versa, impossible to see the people by the fire pit. The cabins were big, but with 14 people, and myself being one of the only girls, I ended up on the futon in the living room. Saturday night, after a long day of fishing on the lake, most of my family was around the fire pit. I was exhausted, however, so I skipped the fire and was laying on my futon. My 11-year-old cousin was the only other person inside the cabin, sitting on the chair next to me playing on his phone. The lights were off in the cabin and it was getting just past dusk outside. I heard the sliding glass door open and I looked up to see a man step inside. I couldn't see the man's features too well because it was dark in the cabin and the little light that was coming from inside was backlighting this person, so the only thing I saw was a silhouette. I immediately recognized that this person wasn't a member of my family. He stepped into the house and started picking up stuff off the table, looking at it and setting it back down. I sat up on the futon and he looked at me. I called out to the man and all I said was, "Sir," but he didn't answer. He took a few more steps towards me, and I just remember wishing that my little cousin wasn't there to witness this if something bad was about to happen. The chair my cousin was sitting in was facing away from the door. I don't even think the man saw him in there with me. The man paused, and I called out again as I scooched back on the futon. No response from the man, and he started walking towards me again. I got myself ready for the worst, even though I had no weapons, basically just getting ready to fight and scream if he came at me. Suddenly, a girl my age appeared in the open glass door. She yelled to the man, "Dad, this isn't our cabin." She sounded out of breath like she had just ran to the door. The man didn't say anything, only turned around and followed her out to a different cabin. I made my cousin go out to the fire pit with me and join our family after that. My cousin had had his headphones in and heard nothing during the whole interaction. I believe that man must have honestly been in the wrong cabin, and maybe thought I was his daughter, but it was so strange. My only guess is the man had some sort of disorder or dementia, because why would he have not answered me when I spoke to him or said anything at all? Even if it was just a simple accident, it gave me the worst scare of my life. I felt so helpless with no weapon nearby as he approached me.